Why did the Buddha say that the most skillful thing one can do with desire, especially sexual desire, is to let go of it? Have you ever paused and truly asked yourself this? In a world where physical intimacy is celebrated, romanticized, even seen as a symbol of love and emotional health, this teaching seems radical, almost unsettling. Why would the enlightened one urge us to turn away from what so many pursue as joy? But perhaps, the very thing we chase for comfort is what quietly binds us. Perhaps desire, in its most seductive form, carries consequences we rarely dare to face. Today, we walk into one of the Buddha's boldest insights, not through fear, but through wisdom. This is not a message of denial, it is an invitation to look deeper. Stay with me until the end of this video, for what we will explore is layered, delicate, and immensely transformative. And if you value content that brings ancient wisdom into modern light, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can continue spreading the Dharma to those ready to awaken. From habit to suffering, desire is not just instinct. Many people misunderstand desire. They believe it to be a natural drive, something primal, something beyond control. But the Buddha taught otherwise. Desire, especially sensual desire, is not merely instinct, it is a mental habit, conditioned over time by ignorance and repetition. What begins as a passing sensation becomes a cycle, craving, grasping, and inevitably, suffering. The danger is not in the feeling itself, but in our attachment to it. We cling to what is pleasant, hoping it will last. We pursue connection, pleasure, or intimacy, believing it will complete us. Yet in doing so, we plant the seeds of restlessness, disappointment, jealousy, and loneliness. Why? Because what arises due to conditions is also bound to cease due to conditions. And anything impermanent cannot be a true refuge. As the Buddha once said, "What you call happiness, I call suffering with a sweet taste." Let me share the story of a man I once counseled, middle-aged, outwardly successful, but inwardly tired. He confessed that after every attempt to seek comfort in physical closeness with others, he was left emptier than before. At first, it was a way to relieve stress. But over time, it became a dependency. He was not seeking love, he was fleeing loneliness. The body was present, but the mind was unsettled. Eventually, through meditation, he began to turn inward. He learned to sit with his own breath, to watch his thoughts without chasing them. And in that quiet space, he discovered something profound. It wasn't solitude he feared. It was the mirror it held up to his own mind. Once he stopped running, he realized that peace was not found in others but in presence. Desire, you see, feeds on absence, on the mistaken belief that something out there will fill the lack in here. But the Dharma invites us to look within. Not to suppress desire, but to understand it. To watch how it arises. To feel how it burns. And then, to let go, not out of denial, but out of wisdom. The more we return to stillness, the more we see, nothing outside of us can truly satisfy a mind that is untrained. As long as we seek escape, we remain bound. But when we stop, when we look, when we sit quietly and breathe through the unease, something shifts. We no longer need to chase. We begin to be free. This is not renunciation through force. This is renunciation through insight. And it is the most compassionate thing you can offer to yourself. Seeing the truth clearly, we are the makers of our own experience. The Buddha did not teach us to merely observe life as passive witnesses. He taught us to recognize that we are, moment by moment, the creators of our own experience. Our mind is not just a mirror, it is also a sculptor. With every thought, emotion, and perception, we shape the world we live in. This creation is not accidental. It is born of habits, of assumptions, of deeply embedded views. Desire plays a central role in this process. It molds the raw materials of perception into a narrative of me and mine. It tells us what is pleasurable, what is worth clinging to, what is part of our identity. And so, we chase after sensations and people, not because they are inherently meaningful, but because we believe they complete the image we hold of ourselves. But let us be clear, letting go does not mean suppression. Buddhism is not a philosophy of rejection, but of awakening. To let go is to see deeply. To see how a thought arises, how it seduces the mind, how it loops back upon itself. And then to no longer follow it. When we understand the cycle, we are no longer its prisoner. To let go is to realize that desire is not some external force pressing upon us, it is a habit we participate in. We feed it by identifying with it, by believing it is ours. But the moment we turn the light of awareness upon it, we see, it is just a mental formation. Impermanent. Empty. Conditioned. The great teacher Ajahn Chah once said, letting go is not getting rid of. It's seeing with clarity. And when you see with clarity, you no longer chase shadows. You no longer need to grasp. You are free not because you pushed desire away, but because you understood it so deeply, it no longer had the power to move you. That is the essence of inner liberation. Skillfully reconstructing the self. It is one of the great misconceptions in spiritual life that awakening means to annihilate the self in an instant. The Buddha, in his immense compassion and understanding, never demanded such a violent rupture. Instead, he offered a wiser path, not to destroy the self, but to refine it, to shape it skillfully like a craftsman carving wood into something useful and beautiful. Before we can let go of the I, we must first know how to hold it properly. The mind, by its very nature, seeks a reference point, a sense of agency, a sense of this is me doing this. The Buddha knew this. That is why he taught not to suppress the sense of self immediately, but to train it. To let it serve the path instead of hindering it. So, we begin by cultivating a wholesome identity, a self that chooses mindfulness over distraction, stillness over restlessness, compassion over craving. You may tell yourself, right now, I am the one who chooses to dwell in awareness. In this moment, I am the meditator, the seeker of truth. This temporary self, this skillful I, is not the enemy. It is a raft. A vehicle. It is a guide that points us toward release. In the same way a traveler needs a map before he can throw it away, the mind needs a stable sense of self to walk the path before it can transcend identity altogether. So train this self to be virtuous. Train it to be watchful, humble, and present. Let your I be the one who bows, who sits, who listens deeply to the breath and the silence beneath all thoughts. Let it be the one who chooses peace over passion. And when the time comes, even this self, this skillful, gentle companion can be set aside. Like a raft no longer needed once the river is crossed. Until then, carry it with mindfulness. Let it serve the journey home. Mindfulness and meditation, the gateway to liberation. In one of the Buddha's most beautiful analogies, he compared the meditative mind to a pat of butter melting into a slice of warm bread. It is not forced. It is not separate. It simply merges softly, deeply, completely. This is the heart of mindfulness, not to observe from a distance, but to enter fully into the present moment, to breathe with it, to become one with it. When the breath rises, you rise with it. When it falls, you fall. There is no watcher, no watch, just awareness, intimate and immediate. We are not meditating to escape life, but to finally touch it with clarity and gentleness. In doing so, we discover a subtle truth, that peace is not something we gain, it is what remains when grasping ends. A monk once shared this simple but profound insight. He had spent years trying to fix his inner turmoil by seeking companionship, approval, distraction. But nothing lasted. Until one day, as he sat quiet, steady, breathing, he felt something different. Not euphoria. Not excitement. But a quiet joy, rooted in freedom. He said, "For the first time, I was content not because I had someone beside me, but because I no longer needed anyone beside me." Such is the fruit of true meditation. It teaches the heart to be whole on its own. In mindfulness, we are not pushing desire away, we are outgrowing it. The breath becomes our home. Simplicity becomes our nourishment. Solitude becomes our companion, not because we reject the world, but because we have found something deeper than what the world can offer. In this space, untouched by clinging, the self begins to dissolve, not with violence, but with grace. And what remains is presence, pure, boundless, and profoundly still. Letting go of sexual desire, because it is the most difficult to master. The Buddha did not label sexual desire as sin. He was never a teacher of shame. Instead, he was a teacher of truth. And the truth is this: of all human cravings, sexual desire is among the most subtle, the most persuasive, and the most difficult to master. It does not shout, it whispers. It entices not just through the body, but through fantasy, longing, and the deep-seated hunger to be desired, to feel whole, to dissolve into another. But like all things rooted in attachment, its sweetness carries a hidden bitterness. When not understood, it becomes a force that manipulates the mind, casting illusions of connection, promises of fulfillment, yet often leaving behind emptiness and confusion. The Buddha, in his boundless compassion, never told us to suppress desire through force. He offered something far more profound: liberation through understanding. To let go of sexual desire is not to destroy something beautiful, it is to see its true nature without being enchanted. It is to recognize how it arises, how it grips the heart, how it fades, and how much energy we invest chasing a moment that never truly satisfies. Letting go does not mean becoming cold or detached. In fact, it is the highest form of care for oneself and for others. It means refusing to be a puppet of fleeting sensations. It means stepping out of the cycle of seeking, having, losing, and suffering. And this conscious release is what the Buddha called skillful. Because it requires not repression, but wisdom. Not denial, but clarity. It is not about pushing desire away, but standing still while it rushes past you, knowing that you no longer need to follow. This kind of letting go is not sterile, it is radiant. It leaves behind not absence, but peace. Not loneliness, but wholeness. The wise do not let go because they must. They let go because they see. And in seeing, they are free. Letting go of desire is not an act of suppression. It is an act of seeing clearly. When we truly understand the nature of craving, not only its pleasure, but its shadow, we begin to loosen our grip. And in doing so, we discover a joy far more enduring than momentary pleasure, the joy of freedom, of inner stillness, of not needing anything outside ourselves to feel whole. As the Buddha taught, freedom is not found in the fulfillment of desire, but in the end of craving. This path is not easy, but it is beautiful. And if something in your heart stirred while listening today, I invite you not just to think differently, but to live differently. Leave a comment below. What did this teaching awaken in you? Let your reflections become part of this growing Sangha of seekers. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel and help us bring timeless truths to a world that so desperately needs them. Until next time, may you be well, May you be free, may you walk the path with wisdom.